Hi, I'm not a believer in big introductions. Given that there are about 5 times as many people as are usually at these kind of events, I'm assuming that most of you know Christos's work. His first novel, Loaded, was published in 1995, and his other two novels before The Slap with the Jesus Man and Dead Europe. Dead Europe won many major literary prizes. Loaded was a massive seller and made a really fantastic film called Head On. Which a lot of people I know by mistake say, have you seen Head Job? It's really good. Anyway. But one of the things that's really, really wonderful about The Slap is the varied use of voice. There are 8 major characters. The novel is told from 8 different points of view. And I tried 4 different points of view and Burden nearly killed me, and you've gone for the 8. And so what I wanted Christos to do to start with was to actually read very briefly from a section towards the end of the novel. Can you do that?
Richie, who believed the world was spiralling out of control, that it had dislodged from its axis, that the ether could not expand fast enough to contain the implosion, that it was all leading to a violent, catastrophic and, for the human species if no other, a deservedly sadistic end, was certain of only 3 things in his life. He had counted them down in the short time his father had left the table to go to the toilet. 1, that his mother was the best mother on the planet. 2, that the American television series 6 Feet Under was an alternative universe, a better universe, and the one in which he wished he existed. And 3, that he was in love with his mate, Nick Churchick. These 3 things were the only certainty. Everything else was just bullshit, fake, a con. Everything else did not matter. Wait, he counted one more certainty. Connie was the best friend a young art fag boy could have. He started to panic. 4 was an even number. He did not like even numbers, did not trust them. He needed one more certainty. He looked around at the crowded pub, grimaced at the smell of beer, cooking oil and stale smoke, tried to block out the incessant ching-chang-ching of the pokey machines. He needed one more item for his list, one more certainty, and he needed to find it before his father came back from the toilet. Mum, 6 Feet Under, Nick Churchick, Connie. Just one more. He started tapping furiously on the table. His chest felt tight. He was going to need his Ventolin. You idiot, he snarled at himself. Stay calm. He tried to block out the congealed, fatty mess of his half-eaten chicken schnitzel on the table. He couldn't concentrate. Not with a barrage from the pokies. Not with a Delta Goodrem video playing on the plasma screen over the bar. He detested Delta Goodrem. He wished he had died of cancer. Mum, 6 Feet Under, Nick Churchick, Connie, and his dad was coming back. He had to make a decision now. His father was sitting down, looking at him with that bored, sheepish grin that said, I don't want to be here any more than you do. His father burped. Richie got a whiff of beer and smoke and tomato sauce. 5. If he ended up anything like his old man, he would off himself. 5. Richie breathed out slowly. He wasn't having an asthma attack. He didn't need his Ventolin. He slumped back on his chair, crossed his arm. Mum, 6 Feet Under, Nick Churchick, Connie, and that he'd kill himself if he ended up like Craig Hiller sitting opposite him. They were all the certainties he needed. He's so guilty about Delta Goodrem.
Yes, if he ever does die of cancer. One of the reasons that was actually one of my, Christos suggested reading it, but it was one of my favourite passages in the book. One, because it was just, the voice is so exuberant and it so captured a kind of that a sort of teenage intensity. But it's in some ways it's a novel about midlife crisis, I suppose you could call it, but it's also about the younger generation moving into adult life, and with that kind of exuberance that I mentioned that Richie had, and the novel felt to me like a really fantastic imaginative response to a lot of the issues, say, that Mark Davis wrote about in Gangland, that instead of being kind of jealous or uncomfortable with the younger generation coming up, it celebrates the younger generation coming up. Were you kind of conscious of thinking about those kind of generational issues?
It's funny, in the actual writing of the book, I realised really early on with the slap that I wanted to write in multiple voices. Partly because of the pleasure of writing that, partly because I wanted to inhabit the mind of a 40-year-old woman and the mind of a 70-year-old man and the mind of teenagers. But in the writing of it, I was very conscious that I think that there's so much fear and negativity around adolescents and young people. And as the novel took shape, I've got to say it in a way, there's nothing explicit at all in the book, but if you like, how it worked for me was almost like the book begins just after the Tampa election, and if you like, it ends just before the election where Howard lost the prime ministership. And that says something about what I was trying to say and do with this book. And it came to me in the writing that the generations that I actually felt most positive about were the younger generation, the two teenage characters, and Manoli, the old man in his 70s. And the people I've been harshest with, I think, are my generation. And I think that's interesting you say. Maybe it's a bit of a midlife crisis book in that way. But I do think there's something about the selfishness and the ethos of greed in my generation that I wanted to explore with this book.
I might actually leap to not my next planned question, but one that follows on from that notion of greed, because a key theme of the novel is the way in which people identify is shifting. That is, maybe a generation ago it might have been country of origin or class, but class is not at all clear in this book. I mean, the most working class character, Harry, is the wealthiest character. Rosie's parenting tendencies, attachment parenting, that kind of stuff, are very middle class, yet she's probably the most impoverished person. Talk a bit about class and those kind of issues.
Look, I mean, for anyone who knows my work, class is kind of one of the fundamental areas of interest for me. Partly I think that is because I come from, in lots of ways, a very traditional working class family. I'm no longer that. Through my parents were factory workers. Through the education that they gave to me, I became something else, a middle class. We heard so much over the last 15 years, and it's not only Howard, this began with the Keating years, about class changing in Australia, something called the aspirational class. And I really wanted to explore what that meant. In that way, those things are quite conscious. Harry is, he's a mechanic. That was his trade, and he ends up having a big place down the beach in Brighton or Sandringham. That's where I think he lives. But I think that kind of changing questions around class are really interesting. I think they're fascinating. And one thing that was firing, there's a fire in the belly when you write, or there is for me, was that I felt like in the pages of Australian fiction, and I'm making a generalisation, Sophie, I know, but in the pages of Australian fiction, on our television screens, on our cinema screens, we weren't seeing this. It was like class, society, the culture that was being presented felt like a generation back. It didn't feel woke and Asian and queer in the way that I was experiencing my city and that I was experiencing the middle class in my city. So in that sense, yes, that was really conscious.
What class would Hector see himself as being? Hector is the man who has the barbecue where the child is slapped.
I think Hector is, as much as I hate saying that because I think he's not at all a courageous man, but maybe that's is me in that way. He is, because it's really interesting. People who've read the book, and this may reflect something about my generation and relationship with kids. The big questions I'm getting are not actually about whether it's ever right to hit a child, although that of course people are asking me that, but about public schools and private schools. Those debates are fantastic. And I think Hector is a man who's trying very hard to stay true to an ethos that he, in the way he lives, in the way he loves, in the way he's raising his own children, he's actually quite abandoned. So in that way, he's a really sad character because I think he's ignored aspects of relating to people, aspects of thinking about the world that actually his father and his mother have.
I think you're being tough on Hector. I thought that, in a way, what was interesting was the way his wife, Aish, is Indian, and so she's got a whole lot of cultural values which are very important to her as well. And so the private school, public school partly plays itself out in terms of those kind of cultural differences, I thought. So,
That's really true. It's really funny. I think I am actually harder on these characters than any that I've ever written before, and I think that's probably because they do inhabit something called the middle class, and because I'm really uncomfortable about what that means. Because I don't want to sit here and pretend that I know, like that there's kind of answers to anything in this book in that way. What I said. I was trying to describe something that I didn't think was appearing in the pages of our literature. It was funny. I actually, after I finished the second draft of the book, I read a fantastic piece of journalism called "The Longest Decade" by George Megalogiannis, which was about Keating and Howard those years, and it kind of. I think that's the only time I've kind of heard echoes of what's in the slap there, but from a journalist point of view, sort of saying, actually, let's describe what this aspirational class is, rather than kind of look at it completely from a view of negativity. Like, actually, how does it manifest itself? What kind of values is it reflecting? What kind of society is it going to create?
Another thing that I personally really responded to in the book was that you, as a gay man, were prepared to talk about parenting issues, because it's obviously there's a huge amount of taboo and kind of carry on about people who don't have children having views on parenting, let alone gay people who don't have children. In fact, I looked you up on Wikipedia, and it has a line in there that says, in a single sentence, "He is openly gay and a Richmond Football Club supporter." Full stop. Now, so I thought that just the gesture of writing about parenting as a person without children, as a gay man, was a radical thing to do. Did you feel like that when you were writing about it? Did anyone make you feel, or since the book's been published, has anyone made you feel that you actually didn't have the right to have a view on these subjects?
There was a journalist in Sydney who kind of intimated to me that he thought, you don't have a child of your own, therefore you really don't have the right to talk about these subjects. That's really, I think, the only comment like that I've heard publicly or expressed to me. Look, I'm going to say this because it's really important. Yes, I'm not a biological father, and actually I went through a period maybe 10 years ago where I kind of came to, it was really distressing. Because I thought, I do actually love children. I would have liked to have been a father, but the reality of was that it wasn't going to happen. I didn't just want to be a donor parent. If I was going to be a biological parent, I wanted to be an active parent. But kind of coming through that, I've got nephews and nieces now who are adults. I've been around, I've got godsons. I've been around friends with children for more than 25 years in my life. And I think not long after that kind of crisis, and I'll call it was a little crisis. It was that thinking. What happened was that one of my nephews was a teenager, and in that adolescent way was going through a really difficult time with his parents. And he kind of called up and came and stayed with me and my partner for a little while, and we talked through things, and I realised that there's something about the uncle role that is really important. There's something about the mentoring role that's really important. I think maybe I understand that from having a connection through my Greek heritage to a notion of extended family. And maybe in the West we just want too much. It's like, it's taken a long battle to come to an acceptance within my family around sexuality. Maybe we can't have it all, and I think that the aunt and uncle roles are really important in culture.
Well, Connie's aunt is bringing her up, and she's a really wonderful character. But Anouk is an interesting character in terms of she chooses to remain childless. She actively thinks about it and chooses to remain childless because the kind of debates around having children. She doesn't want to get drawn into the kind of conservative decisions that having children can make you make, like what school to send them to. Is that, I mean, was Anouk your childless self? Was that...
My child... Anouk... No, it's not. It's actually, it's a really good point, because I think that's true. I knew that... I knew in the writing of it that I did want a character that made a decision not to have a child. That was actually a reality for so many people, and that actually... I mean, I think Anouk's reasons for not having a child are really, really good reasons. And yes, so I was writing a book about family. I was writing a book about adults and young people, and it seemed to me really important that one of those characters made that decision, and made that decision not by accident, but actually quite consciously.
Well, as a parenting expert, I'm going to ask you, when do you think a woman should stop breastfeeding?
You know what, it's... As a man, I will shut up. No, it's funny that, because a lot of people have responded to Rosie, the woman whose child is slapped, is breastfeeding him, and he's 4 by the end of the book. And it's scary. And it's funny, I mean, part of it is interesting to see the reaction to something like that. You do take, it's that vampiric element of the writer, you do take from life. But there are 3 women through the last, I would say, 20 years who made the choice to breastfeed until the child was happy to leave the breast.
Friends of yours.
Friends of mine, right? And all I can say about that is that there's nothing that, you know, that the child, that there's no actual rule that I can make. I don't actually think that breastfeeding itself has affected the child's move into adolescence and into adulthood negatively or positively. Look, it's a really hard terrain, because I know what it was like first time I saw a friend breastfeed a child who was 3. I just kind of, my reaction was visceral, and I had to question what was the nature of that reaction. But I would hate people to come away and go, oh, you know, the problem with Rosie and Hugo is that she breastfeeds him too late. I mean, I think the problem with Rosie is that she's married to an alcoholic man, and that she can't face up to what that means. She can't make the choice of leaving him.
And all the other thing between Rosie and Gary, who's the alcoholic husband, in a way is a bit of that class. He guilts her constantly about being working class, so he kind of uses it in a kind of in the relationship, the kind of fairly difficult relationship they have. I think I've said this before. People have heard me speak that I think in some ways writing can be like acting. It's kind of inhabiting, or trying to inhabit different characters. I just want you to talk a bit about how you inhabited the different characters, and possibly maybe tell us who was the most difficult for you to write, because you mentioned Manoli and Richie. They're the 2 that I just felt you just kind of, I could just see you flew with those characters. They were just extraordinary. But I suspect that a couple of the others might have given you a bit more grief. And like Harry, for example, I found a really tough character to read. I don't know what he was like to write.
The toughest characters to write were Rosie and Aisha. Partly, I think, because they were the most kind of bourgeois characters, and I wanted to, and also I think because they're women too, you know, because I wanted to make sure that I was being authentic to these voices. Harry, one of the things that's been interesting in responses is that I know Harry is a really difficult man. He's a violent man. He's an arsehole. I can see that, but I've got this element of love for him, because he so reminds me of so many of my cousins, so many of the boys I grew up with. And I got a great... Someone sent me a card, and it was one of the best... There was a woman who grew up in the western suburbs, and she said, I'm so excited. You've written a character that reminds me of all these boys I know who are sexist and lovable and ugly and really good men, and you've written it. And I felt... what kind of a sense of real relief there. In terms of the inhabiting, you got to understand, I came to the slap after working on Undead Europe, which was a really difficult novel to write. I'll be really quick. For those of you who don't know it, it's a book that deals with legacies of European history, particular racism and particular anti-Semitism. And it was like for such a long time I felt like what you do is you do unleash monsters, I think, sometimes when you write. And I felt like I was being possessed by these monsters. And I wanted to just get back into the pleasure of just writing and using my imagination to create characters. And what I ended up doing, I don't know if you do this, Sophie, but I would write, and then I'd get away from the computer or away from the notebook, because I do write in longhand, and I would start performing. I actually literally would start performing. I would start performing what it would be like to be a woman who's 42. What would it be like to be a woman who's 17? And try and I think I learnt this through working with actors, because I write plays, and it's actually one of the great skills that actors have taught me, that it's not only dialogue, it's not only what happens in your head, but it's also how you physically move in space that dictates what a character is. And I think without that experience of working with actors, I don't know if I could have written something like The Slap. That's how I did it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know that when I do it in my head with just trying to get the voice right, trying to hear the voice, but that idea of actually kind of moving to some kind of performance. If we had more time, I'd ask you to perform the characters. But I'm going to open for a few questions now.